It was just another quiet afternoon at Mel's Diner, the kind of place where the coffee never stops pouring and the regulars know each other by name. Sarah, a young waitress with a tired smile and worn-out shoes, was finishing up her shift. She had only $5 left in her apron pocket, her tips for the day, and rent was due in 2 days. Every dollar mattered. But when an elderly woman walked in, shivering from the cold and wearing clothes that looked decades old, something tugged at Sarah's heart. The woman looked lost, like she hadn't had a warm meal in days. Sarah watched as the woman glanced at the menu, then slowly folded it shut, her hands trembling. She asked softly, "Just a glass of water, please." That was all she could afford. Sarah hesitated. She thought about her empty fridge back home, the overdue electricity bill, and that crumpled $5 bill. But without a second thought, she slid it across the counter and said, "Lunch is on me today." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, too choked up to speak. What Sarah didn't know was that this wasn't just any elderly woman. Her name was Eleanor, and she wasn't broke, not in the way it seemed. Behind her frail frame and second-hand coat was a woman with a secret. She was a billionaire. One of those quiet ones, never flashy, always hidden from the headlines. She had come to town for reasons no one knew, and she was searching, not for money or fame, but for something much deeper. As the woman quietly ate the sandwich Sarah ordered for her, something changed. She watched Sarah closely, not just how she moved, but how she treated everyone around her. There was kindness in her that couldn't be taught, and in that small act of generosity, Eleanor saw something rare, something she hadn't felt in a long time. What happened next would change Sarah's life forever, but in that moment she had no idea. She thought she was just helping someone in need. She didn't know that her $5 act of kindness was about to come back to her in a way she never could have imagined. Sarah went back to wiping tables and refilling coffee mugs, not thinking much about the $5 she had just given away. It wasn't the first time she'd helped someone out, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Life had never been easy for her. After losing her mom at a young age and growing up bouncing between relatives, Sarah learned early on that kindness was a choice you make, not something you wait to receive. She didn't know that the woman now quietly sipping soup at the corner booth was Eleanor Whitmore, a name once whispered in boardrooms and business magazines. Eleanor had disappeared from the public eye years ago after selling her tech empire. Since then, she'd traveled under the radar, using her time and money to quietly observe how people treated others when no one was watching. She'd grown tired of empty conversations and people pretending to care because of who she was. That's why she dressed down and walked into the diner unnoticed. She wasn't looking for food. She was looking for someone real. Eleanor had been through a lot in recent years. She had money, yes, but she'd lost her husband, outlived her closest friends, and found herself wondering if wealth really mattered when you had no one to share it with. That's when she began taking these quiet trips, searching for something, anything, that reminded her of why she once believed in people. Watching Sarah, Eleanor felt something shift. There was a warmth in that diner she hadn't felt in years. No one knew her, no one asked for anything. And still, that young woman gave all she had, not expecting anything in return. It was exactly the kind of heart Eleanor had hoped to find. But Eleanor didn't say anything that day. She finished her soup, left a quiet thank you, and disappeared just as quickly as she had arrived. Sarah noticed she was gone, but there was no note, no name, nothing left behind. Just an empty bowl and a moment of human connection that felt bigger than she could explain. Back in her small apartment that night, Sarah thought about the woman. There was something different about her. She couldn't quite place it, but something about the way she looked at Sarah felt deeper, like she saw more than just a waitress in a worn-out uniform. And Sarah had no idea that this was only the beginning. A few days passed, and life moved on at the diner like it always did. Slow mornings, regular customers, and small talk over scrambled eggs. Sarah tried not to think about the $5 she gave away, but with each passing day, The pressure of her bills and the ache of not having enough started to weigh heavier. She picked up extra shifts, even stayed late cleaning the kitchen just to earn a few more tips. Still, her paycheck barely covered the essentials. One evening, just before closing, a man in a dark suit walked in. He didn't look like he belonged in a place like Mel's Diner. Too polished, too serious. Sarah greeted him with her usual warmth, but he wasn't there for a meal. He asked about the elderly woman who had come in earlier that week, said her name was Eleanor. Sarah hesitated. Something about his tone felt off, not unkind, but like he was hiding something. He left just as quickly as he came, not even ordering coffee. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Who was Eleanor, really? Why would a stranger in a suit be searching for a woman who claimed she couldn't afford a sandwich? Meanwhile, Eleanor was watching from a distance. She hadn't left town. Instead, she had quietly checked into a nearby inn under a different name. She wanted to learn more about Sarah without interfering. Each day, she'd walk past the diner at different hours, sometimes catching glimpses of Sarah through the window. She saw the way Sarah helped a young mother calm her crying baby, how she offered free coffee to a man who had clearly been sleeping in his car. Eleanor was convinced this was the kind of person who deserved more in life. But Eleanor had her own conflicts. She'd spent years avoiding people, mistrusting motives, and shielding herself from those who only saw her as a billionaire. Giving Sarah money would be easy. But what if it changed her? What if it took away the very thing that made her so genuine? At the same time, Sarah's landlord posted a notice on her door, a final warning before eviction. Her hours at the diner had been cut again, and her car had started making strange noises she couldn't afford to fix. Things were falling apart, and she didn't even know why the strange man came asking about a woman who'd vanished after a single bowl of soup. And through it all, Sarah still had no idea just how closely she was being watched. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the diner with barely enough energy to fake a smile. Her feet ached, her phone buzzed with payment reminders, and the final notice on her door was now folded inside her coat pocket. She had less than a week to come up with rent, or she'd be out on the street. As she tied her apron and greeted the early customers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something big. The air felt heavier, like a storm was just beyond the horizon. Back at the inn, Eleanor sat quietly at a table by the window, staring down at an envelope. Inside was a check, a life-changing amount. Enough to pay off every one of Sarah's debts and give her a fresh start. But Eleanor still hadn't decided whether to deliver it. She kept replaying their brief encounter in her mind. Sarah didn't help because she thought someone was watching. She gave because it was who she was. Eleanor was afraid that stepping in might ruin the very purity she'd seen in her. That same afternoon, Sarah was called into the manager's office. Her hours were being cut again. Business was slow, and they couldn't afford to keep everyone on full shifts. Sarah nodded quietly, holding back tears as her world seemed to shrink even more. With no family to turn to, no savings, and no backup plan, she walked out of the diner with her heart pounding. She sat on the curb behind the building, hiding from the customers, wiping away tears with the sleeve of her apron. That's when a black car pulled up at the edge of the parking lot. The same man in the suit stepped out, holding something in his hand. He approached Sarah slowly. She stood, confused and cautious, her breath catching in her throat. "Miss," he said, "Eleanor would like to speak with you." Sarah blinked. "What? I don't. What's going on?" He handed her a card. There was an address on it. No explanation, no signature, just a time and place. Sarah stared at it, her heart racing. Who was Eleanor? Why was this happening? Was this a scam, a mistake, or was she about to walk into something she couldn't possibly understand? She looked down at the card again, and then, without knowing why, she started walking. Sarah clutched the card tightly as she made her way down the unfamiliar street, her mind racing with questions. The address led her to a large house on the edge of town, tucked behind tall hedges and a black iron gate. It looked like something out of another world, quiet, elegant, and far beyond anything she'd ever known. She paused at the gate, thinking maybe it was a mistake, that someone had gotten her mixed up with someone else. But her curiosity, and something deeper she couldn't name, pushed her forward. She rang the bell. A few moments later, the gate clicked open. Inside, the house was quiet. A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, Eleanor, but no longer in her warm coat and scarf. She looked elegant now, graceful, but there was still that same calm warmth in her eyes. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. Sarah stepped inside, feeling like she'd just crossed into a completely different life. Before she could speak, Eleanor gestured for her to follow. They sat across from each other in a sunlit room, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. "I owe you an explanation," Eleanor finally said. "I wasn't honest about who I am." Sarah just nodded, unsure what to say. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Then Eleanor leaned forward and placed the envelope on the table between them. "I came to that diner because I was looking for someone," she said. "Not for business, not for money. I wanted to find one good person who still did the right thing when no one was watching." Sarah stared at the envelope. It was thick, heavy. But just as Eleanor slid it closer, the front door burst open. A younger woman stormed into the room, her voice sharp, her eyes furious. "Mother, what are you doing?" she said, glaring at the envelope. "You're not seriously giving away our family's money to a stranger, again." Sarah froze, caught in a moment that suddenly felt all wrong. Eleanor's face fell. "This is Sarah. She's the one." "You don't know her," the daughter snapped. "You barely know anything anymore. We can't keep cleaning up after your little experiments." Sarah stood up, her heart pounding, the room spinning with confusion. She was no longer sure she was meant to be there at all, or if she'd just walked into a family war with her name on the front line. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, caught between two women and a truth she hadn't asked for. Eleanor's daughter glared at her like she was the problem, like she was a threat. The air felt heavy with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. "Please," Eleanor said, her voice shaking but firm, "you don't understand. Sarah gave me her last $5 without even knowing who I was. That kind of heart, it's rare. And you want to give up everything because of that?" The daughter snapped. "She's a waitress, Mom. This isn't a fairy tale." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. She wasn't sure whether to speak or walk out, but something in her pushed back the fear. "I never asked for anything," she said quietly. "I didn't even know who she was. I just didn't want someone to go hungry." Eleanor looked at her with pride, while her daughter rolled her eyes. "This isn't about kindness. It's about control. You keep looking for someone to fix your loneliness, and you throw money at them like it's love." Eleanor's hands trembled now, the envelope still between them. She looked tired, more tired than she had back at the diner. For a moment, everything was still. Then she pushed the envelope towards Sarah. "This is yours. It's not a handout. It's a beginning. Do something good with it." Sarah opened it slowly. It wasn't just a check. It was a letter. A handwritten note from Eleanor, telling her she believed in her, telling her that sometimes the world changes because one person decides to care. But just as the weight of that moment sank in, Eleanor's daughter let out a sharp breath. "Fine. If you're giving her the money, I'm done. Don't expect me to clean up after this when it all falls apart." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent again. Sarah looked at Eleanor, unsure of what to say. But before she could speak, Eleanor reached into her coat and pulled out a second envelope. "This one's not for you," she said. "It's for someone else you'll meet one day. You'll know when. Pass it on." Sarah held the two envelopes in her hands, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. She came in thinking her life might change. But she had no idea she was now part of something much bigger. In the days that followed, Sarah's life began to shift in ways she never expected. The check Eleanor gave her covered more than just rent. It gave her breathing room for the first time in years. She paid off her bills, fixed her car, and even signed up for evening classes in community college, something she had dreamed of but never thought possible. She didn't quit the diner, though. Not yet. There was something grounding about it, something that reminded her where she started. Word got out eventually, as it always does in small towns. People whispered about the mysterious woman and the money, but Sarah kept the details quiet. It wasn't about the money for her. It was about what it meant. That someone saw her, truly saw her, and believed she deserved more. As for Eleanor, she moved back into the quiet rhythm of her own life, choosing to stay in town a little longer. She and Sarah met for coffee some mornings, talking about everything from books to how kindness seems so rare these days. They never spoke about the argument with her daughter again. Some wounds take time to heal, and Eleanor knew pushing too hard would only widen the gap. The second envelope remained sealed on Sarah's dresser for weeks. Some nights, she'd stare at it and wonder who it was meant for. But she trusted that one day, like Eleanor had said, she'd know. That day came sooner than expected. One rainy evening, a teenage boy came into the diner, soaked and shaking, asking if he could use the restroom. Sarah noticed the bruises on his arms, the fear in his eyes. She gave him a hot meal and didn't ask questions. But something told her this was the moment. Quietly, she slipped the second envelope into his backpack before he left. She didn't need to know what happened next. She just hoped it made a difference, the same way Eleanor had done for her. In the end, the story wasn't really about money. It was about the power of small moments, the impact of kindness, and how one simple act, like giving your last $5, can ripple through lives in ways you never see coming. Sarah's story wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, and that's what made it unforgettable.